So there's this saying I once heard as a kid after learning that a tomato is a fruit, that intellect is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, but wisdom is knowing that the tomato doesn't belong in a fruit salad. And so what I want to talk to you today actually is about food. And I have this bold claim that I believe that many people, not all, but majority, you can say the mainstream, don't actually understand food, or that we don't know food at all. And to go even farther, I believe that ancient people, or people before, you can say, the microscope, understood food a lot better than we do today. So let's talk about that. This is just a reminder, if you're still watching, to please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Now back to the video. So some of the concepts and stuff that I'll talk about in this video, I've talked about before, but I think it would be very helpful if we explored it in the contents of something like real and tangible that we interact with and participate with every single day. And like I mentioned, that would be, our food. Now, when I claim that we don't actually know what it is, I feel like it's due to our view of reduction to everything to just its parts. And I've said this before in other videos. And so what do I mean by that? So, but let's go back into the beginning of something like, what does it mean to have, cultural foods, or foods that are part of a culture? When you think about pierogies, there's an identity attached to that, whether it be Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Eastern Europe. Then you have something like pasta that's associated with Italy. When I say even something like Chinese food, there's types of food that's attached to that as well. And so you can see that it builds upon an identity of who we are as people. And as the world becomes more globalized and more obsessed with scientism, I think we could start losing of what it means to participate with food, or what food is in general. And so, I've talked to friends and things before in the past, and when they're playing video games or anything like that, they say they want a hit of dopamine, right? So you see that there's this reduction all the way to just our parts. You don't say like, I'm just trying to have fun with my friends. I'm trying to hang out. I'm just trying to have a little bit of fun, have some joy in my life, whatever it may be. And we do the same exact thing with food. So when we think of something like an orange, our modern minds go to something like vitamin C. But I think there's a problem with that already, to just reduce that to its parts. There's a lot more to an orange than just vitamin C. And I don't even mean biologically. There's an experience we have with it of peeling the orange, getting to its either sour or sweet center, the texture of it, the juices that flow in our mouths, and just having this experience with it. And, oranges, obviously, biologically speaking, also have more than just vitamin C. But then you add another layer of complexion when you start introducing various different foods together. And so when we bring these foods together, once again, when you go to the very, way back, we'll say maybe to caveman or ancient times, or just as human started to farm, like Mesopotamia or something, there's an aspect where food became a binding element to celebrate, whether it be, there was particular ceremonial foods. There were foods also that seasonally came, that interacted with how you would celebrate particular holidays due to that seasonality. And it really, I think, brought us together, and all the health aspects, you can say, all the biological things we think of today, kind of came along with it when it was properly ordered through purpose of food rather than just its parts. And what makes me want to talk about this is the fact that, I really enjoy keeping track of my health. I think pay attention to a certain diet that you have, or, understanding the foods that you consume is very important. And obviously within the political space or any other space you may be, you see that conversation is kind of being put out into the forefront. I follow a lot of influencers and, different, you can say, doctors. I don't know if they are or not. Some of them claim or not. But, I listen to people like Paul Saladino. There's Dr. Artist with the nicotine. And, then there's other people on the other side of the spectrum that have their own thoughts. And whether these influencers are right or wrong in terms of the biology of things, I don't think whether they're more right-leaning or natural or more, mainstream and part of the industrial food complex or whatever, I don't think either side really understands what it means to eat or have food. And so, when you go to one side, let's say, if people are not familiar, Paul Saladino is a person that really advocates for animal-based foods, to have it as least processed as possible, and really advocates for eating red meat and staying away from a lot of sugars or things that might cause inflammation in your gut. Not a big proponent to vegetables. And then you have, another side of that, the other coin of that, with the other extreme, that is, maybe you can say something like veganism, that we should eat less meat or no meat, no animal products at all, and just eat the grains of the field, or the different leafy greens and different things like that. There's this aspect where they both, in a way, almost play the role of Cain, because their sacrifice is not enough. And, as a materialist or a fundamental kind of like Christian, maybe you're thinking, yeah, but, Abel did sacrifice the cattle that was accepted. He did a blood sacrifice that was accepted. But I think there's something deeper that's happening there. But not to get too into specifically about Cain and Abel, but what they're both missing, I believe, is like the experience that we're having with that food and with with the land itself. Back in medieval times, especially with the rise of Christianity, there was a building of a liturgical calendar that was associated together with the natural world as well as the spiritual world, or theological knowledge, you can say. And these helped us bring those two worlds together to participate with the environment that the people were living in today. And so, in Polish culture, because me being Polish, you have a lot of things with mushrooms, or something like hunter stew, a lot of cabbage, you have pierogies, and a lot of pork-based meats. And so with that, it built together with the theological view, and there was more of fullness in the participation, everything from farming to bringing it to the table in order to eat together. And I believe that through that purpose of having it above, like putting the purpose of the food for celebration or some higher meaning, actually down the chain of that hierarchy of our participation with that food, actually properly integrates itself, you can say, even into our biological beings. Now, there are some studies and things like that, and I don't necessarily like referring to studies. I don't think science knows all, and the point of this video in itself is kind of to disprove that only the scientific is necessary. But there is a little bit of science that shows that your genes actually, what is healthy for you actually is dependent upon the culture that you come from. And so you can say that a pierogi can be healthy for a Polish person, but might cause inflammation to somebody maybe that comes from the Mediterranean or South America. Even with that study, though I'm pointing to a scientific study, there's an aspect of it that's showing us that the purpose or the land that we come from there's a rootedness in there of how the food interacts with us. And so there's also an aspect of the food of its meaning that is associated. So, growing up Polish, on Christmas Eve, we would have something called Vigilia, where it was a fasting period before Christmas, the birth of Christ. And so you would only eat the foods that did not contain meat. So there was a lot of cabbage, a lot of poppy seed type sweet bread, pierogies with mushrooms in them. And in that context, they all have an associated meaning of what it means to eat that food as well. And now, if I had this dinner with someone that grew in a Hispanic family, of course they can learn what that means, but there's no connection with their own culture. And so what tends to happen when we just view, for example, something like an orange is just vitamin C, is that at that point, what's the point of participating with the orange or having an orange? You can just take a pill or a supplement to gain your vitamin C. Now, you see this always, interestingly enough, this imagery in movies that have to do with a dystopian future. And there's always a set limit of supplements. Like there's this little pills they receive. I think the show Rick and Morty did something about this in one of their episodes. And there's other films and stuff that associate and have pills. Now, what that imagery is actually showing us is our disconnect from our environment and the fullness of our participation with the world, and just narrowing it down in a way you can almost think of like just getting tunnel vision where we only see its part. And what happens is we even interact with other human beings in that manner. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, that's when you have a friend or somebody that just says like, oh, I'm going to have this just for a dopamine hit, instead of having a fullness of participation with his friends and everybody around him or her. And so this is the problem with the nutritionists or doctors or influencers, whatever they are, is a lot of what they're teaching is disconnected from any type of higher reality. It's all from the bottom up instead of from the top down. Now, some of that is good because there seems to be rebalancing of how we eat our food or how we think about that food. But even that is not enough to keep us as a people together. Food is served as a huge purpose for that. There's a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, where at the end he gains his meal from only hunting. And he explains the importance of meaning behind food as well, because in the last chapter, he had to hunt for all his food or gather all of it. So he had to gather his mushrooms, get the salt, hunt the boar, and then he had to cook it all, to present it to a family dinner. And in it, he explains how wonderful it was because he had stories that were connected with all the food of his long hours out in the woods looking for these pigs, or the story of how he had to get salt from this rock, mushroom gathering with friends, and it all had this meaning that bound it together. And he was able to share those stories, and those people were able to participate in a way, connect to those stories with him by consuming the food that he provided. And so there's a higher level of this in the liturgical calendar that I mentioned within the church, specifically the Catholic Church, and the Orthodox do this as well, where you've even periods of fasting that is associated with, gathering or harvesting foods and when to pause the harvest and things like that. And so it brings it all together in a natural sense and a utilitarian sense, you can say, of not over harvesting your crops. But there's also a theological aspect in it, a meaning behind it, where we pause a consumption of a particular type of food, or make different types of foods in order to be able to participate with this liturgical calendar. So an example of this is something like Lent. I know in the Byzantine Catholic Church, through the 40-day fasting period, there's no animal products at all. So you're essentially vegan for that whole period. Now, biologically speaking, it also makes sense because you want a period of cleansing through your body. And so it is important for a rebalance or not an overconsumption of something, maybe like proteins or whatever it is, so that veganism actually helps you kind of like reset the balance in your body before going back to normal after the 40 days. And on top of that, because there's a meaning attached to it, there's a higher growth of the soul, or the growth of a mind, right? And what I mean by that also is there's an obstacle you have to overcome, because we as a people that live in overabundance sometimes believe that things are impossible, right? So when you talk to somebody, say, not to eat meat for 40 days, they automatically think that's not possible at all. It's just something that's they're incapable of doing due to the immense comfort that they have in this, first world kind of environment that a lot of us live in. And so it also helps us grow spiritually and rebalance ourselves in order to reach a better purpose in our own lives and realize that that the purposes that we have in this world and the way we communicate and the rituals we have go beyond just the biological. But because it goes beyond the biological, it doesn't mean that it's disconnected or separated. There's actually a cohesion and a link that happens between both. Another example of this is, let's say you're a big fan of strawberries and you love strawberries. I know that, once again, these things are accessible to us all the time, but thinking in a manner of, imagine not being able to have strawberries until that season of the strawberry is available, when it's ready to harvest. That seasonality, that excitement of that sweet fruit that will grow within that season starts also developing a story within all of us for our wants to participate with that strawberry. And so you have different meals that might be associated with that seasonality. And so the season and purpose and the way the natural world and with the way we work kind of link up together. And it's important to note how heavily food is associated with culture and our own identities through that culture as well. You know, when someone shares where they're from, whether they're from Mexico or any other country, usually that's deeply associated with the foods that that country consumes to make them Mexican. It works both ways. You can say the food makes who they are, but they make what the food is. And so, you know, with conversations, you can have, like I mentioned, I'm Polish, and people might say it immediately, like, oh, I love pierogies, right? Or you talk about, if someone says, let's grab Mexican food, you automatically understand that. Now, there was a time when this stuff wasn't readily available for us at any time, at any period, and also at any place. So now in a place like the US, for example, I can just go to a Mexican restaurant, have Mexican food anytime I want. I can go to a Chinese restaurant, I can have anything and participate with these cultures at any time. And in a way, there's almost a archetype of becoming a prostitute of food, because there's too much mixture in it that's happening. And so there's no... even biologically speaking, and not biologically, there's too much mixture that's happening that doesn't allow the food of that particular area or that particular type of food to be able to fully work within who I am in my being, but even, you can say, in the reduction of it all, in the nutrients and stuff of those particular foods to be able to balance out the way my body functions. Now, obviously, I'm not a scientist, but I do believe that the higher purpose, or being able to participate with a particular thing, all those other things on the lower level happen to work, will work out. Like there will be a health level. Now, there is also an aspect that, and this is very important, of there's a carnival kind of happening. We live in a kind of like carnivalistic, if that's even a word, type of world, where we eat a lot of foods that we associate it with culture, but it's almost more associated with something of the period of celebration or during the carnival. You have things that are accessible also to us, things like pizza. You know, a lot of the Chinese food is not even, at least in the US, it's not even real Chinese food. It was created here in the States, and it's all based on taste, right? It almost becomes traffic as well. So you have this aspect of the archetype of me as an individual eating too many different types of food, almost becoming a prostitute. But then the battle becomes to gain my attention, of gaining the tastiest or most voluptuous food, if you can put it that way. So it becomes almost in a sense. I see this in social media all the time, right? You just search the hashtag of something like, I think there's some censoring that happens on YouTube. I think you'll understand, but you know, there's food corn that happens. And so you have these overindulgence foods that are not even based on any type of meaning, but are just there for the flavor, the taste, right? That pursue our senses. The only point of it is to be delicious, which I hope we also understand, that the point of food is not only to be delicious. There's like various levels. So there's this reduction that happens. There's two reductions that happen. And like I mentioned in the first part of the video, there's this reduction of it only becoming the vitamin or the nutrient, where we're hyper-focused. That usually happens when we're hyper-focused on our health or something, and we just want that. And then there's this other aspect of it that happens. We get tunnel vision of only wanting the most flavorful or tasty type of food, right? And without the context of a seasonality or celebration or a higher purpose that we strive for, to belong to a nation or to belong to a group of people or to celebrate in a particular way together, you start, even the way we participate, food in of itself becomes kind of separated and hyper-focused and disconnected, right? So it becomes like health, supplements, pills, things like that. And then on the other side, you just have these overfusion of foods just for its taste and flavor. And then myself also gets disconnected in one way, where I participate with too many different types of foods, to the point where it's like almost like me acting in the archetype of a prostitute, versus me being, you can say, overly pure, only participating with food at the most basic level, right? Only the biological level. There's no other level beyond that. And this also affects, once again, of how we participate with each other too, because the phrase "we are what we eat" is has such a deep meaning that I think it goes just beyond, once again, you probably, when I said that phrase, automatically thought in the nutrient level, the biological level. Like, yeah, obviously if you eat healthy things, you're going to be healthy. But there's a deeper meaning to that, where you are what you eat, in terms of like what you consume is what you become, right? And in some sense, if you eat only Polish foods, at some point you're going to want to participate with the Polish culture in a deeper level, because those foods are connected, I should say, to specific stories and specific seasonalities of that land and those people. And so to fully encompass the meaning of those foods, you will have to, in a sense, participate with the rituals of an identity of what it means to become Polish, right? So we have something even like Fat Thursday, where we eat a little pastry called Blonski and things like that. So there's this meaning and stuff that joins us together in order to see like where we belong. So in conclusion, to bring in together a little bit of what I mean by they don't understand our foods, is that whether they are telling you to eat full, fresh veggies or meats or whatever it may be, or whether they're telling you to go vegan or follow a particular diet, they're missing a huge aspect and an important of ritual and participation with food. Because the orange doesn't just contain vitamin C. The orange has a skin that we peel. An orange has memories. An orange has an attachment to a season, and it has an attachment to a culture. It has attachment to meaning. There's a sweetness, there's a flavor, and there's many things that make an orange an orange. And so next time you eat, think about the meaning behind what you eat, what it means. Try not to think of just, I'm having vitamin C, but participate with it in a higher level, in the fullness of its context. And I believe if you attach yourself to a culture or a mythos or the telos, you can say, of a group of foods, instead of just a diet for the sake of its biological necessity, unless it's for health reasons, go beyond and create ritual and have a fuller participation with food. And I think everything will align, and it will make everything healthier, both in body and spirit, than anything that you yourself can keep track of in terms of the different enzymes, nutrients, whatever they may be that you receive. Another last thing I want to mention about food, if you're a materialist and just thinking it's only there's this biological level of its participation, if you only think of food in that manner, it's almost impossible you yourself to keep track of all the necessary requirements that you receive from the foods you eat if you're just looking at it neutrally. Because there's so many levels and different forms that even foods participate with each other that you yourself are not able to keep track of. Because you have to start thinking about, I've talked about this aspect of the tyrant, because if you're getting vitamin C, are you getting there's even a deeper level of, is your minerals balanced? Do you have too many metals in your system? Do you have iron and all these other things? There's just so many things to think about besides just vitamins and calories, that if you've truly tried to take overt, almost tyrannical approach to the way that you eat, and don't give yourself up to a higher spirit that a group of food is attached to in celebration, you'll get lost in the weeds. And I would argue even that you will have an unhealthier system. And the only time that I think extreme diets, like something like carnivore and vegan, is necessary is when there needs to be a cleansing process, which early in the video I already mentioned. It's kind of built in if you follow something like the church calendar truly, that those cleansing or purification times and the times to, you can say, indulge, are all built into the calendar system already for you. And I think it participates together. So yeah, if you like this video and you enjoyed kind of what I talked about, I'm not a medical professional or anything. This is kind of speaking to about food in a theological level. Once again, I'm trying to strive for us to move upwards, not stay down below only in the material, that there's an aspect that pulls us up, spirit. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.